So I've got a kind of a synopsis here. I've swore for years that I was going to do this better, but I'm not. Because I like it like it is. This is where it says RTI, that would now be MT. I like this one. So basically where it says RTI, just, put MTSS, but it's an explanation now of how MTSS works. Now, here's the trick on this one. As I told you when we were together before, this is in our under tonight. The problem that you get into is thinking that the EC people are in charge of this or will be responsible for intervention. They are not. Intervention is what the State Board of Education, DPI, refer to as a school-based committee, SBC. That means the principal's in charge, principal's responsible. If kids don't get their intervention, it comes back to the school administration, not to the EC chair or the EC department or the EC department chair or the compliance technician. It comes back to you as school principal. You have to make sure that when a kid is referred for either academic or behavior or both, that they're getting the interventions that they need in that three-tier formula to try to address their needs before then you go to another 90 before you make an EC placement or EC testing decision. You have to understand that you are in charge of that. So that's the biggie. I won't belabor that, but again, that RTI document, and you should understand what multi-tiered system of support is. Now, second part, before we get into all the laws and do's and don'ts, is the delivery system. One of the things that makes it difficult for students to get a handle on this sometimes is the difference in delivery systems. There's two major delivery systems. There's, and so let me pull that one up right quick. I've got a PowerPoint. Inclusion versus mainstreaming. Now, mainstreaming is different than what we used to call mainstreaming. This is the more modern version, but this is a really good one that talks about the differences in the two. The main difference in inclusion and mainstreaming is inclusion, the EC teachers go into the regular ed classroom. That's the biggie, and they work cooperatively with the regular education teacher. Mainstreaming, kids get to go to some regular ed classes. The teacher doesn't go with them, but others they're pulled into a separate classroom. That would be mainstream. So like for PE, they go down to PE. The EC teacher doesn't go with them. But if they go to English, they instead of going to the English class in the mainstreaming, they would go to the EC teacher's class and they'd all be there together. In the inclusion model, the EC teacher follows them to their core academic classes, and that's it. They don't go to the others. But it's about who does the moving. The teachers move in the inclusion model. In the mainstream streaming one, the kids move. This is a really good one. That's a long one, but it has all the different ins and outs of how all this stuff works. If you are involved in this is 63 slides long, but it covers every bit of it. If you work through all these, you will be an expert on both mainstreaming and inclusion. But here they are for the evening. And so I put all this together for you. Now, I'm going to stop and ask for questions before we dive into EC tonight. Background experience, anybody had experience with that they'd like to share about inclusion and or mainstreaming? Jessica, what do you do at your school?
Which one, as in like, do we do inclusion or do we do mainstreaming, or what are my results?
Are you straddling the fence and doing some of both?
I would love to say that we're doing inclusion, but we aren't there yet. Most of our TMH kids are not mainstreamed either. We did mainstream one student last year in fourth grade to get them ready for intermediate middle school.
Yeah. And so you're still doing self-contained?
We have 2 self-contained classes, yes.
Right. Yeah. Now, in Jennifer and McDowell County, y'all still do some pullouts, don't you?
Yeah, so it all depends on the level of need determined.
Classification, yeah.
Yeah, we schedule it based on classification, and obviously, like you said, it's federal law, so we schedule everything around. Like it seems like we schedule everything around that and the number of EC certified teachers that can fulfill. So there's plenty of inclusion because you can put a whole, like, because it's not grade, like it's grade level, but it's subject based. So,
Yeah.
you know, kids need math, you can put all the kids who need math in one room, which is a little less inclusion than inclusion is meant to be.
Yeah.
But if you put enough other students in there with them post-COVID, the percentage is federally acceptable. And so we do make sure that they are 50% or less of the population. So the other half of the class is not classified. But there are a handful of students that get, when they're pulled out, it's usually only for about half the class. So it's a real interesting thing where they stay in with the students for half and then pull out for the other half.
Yeah.
And then what that does for them on missing all those sections that the students that aren't being pulled out are getting. It's an interesting schedule. I would say that it is an inclusion model done as best we can with our staffing.
Yeah. Jennifer said a number of things there that are very, very insightful and relevant. First is this stuff is so intricate and difficult, it better drive your master schedule. Remember, we talked about that your federal programs have to come first, and this is the most restrictive of those. So you got to figure this out before you do anything else with your classes, is how you're going to do this. Another thing she said is it makes your personnel go further. Now, when this first came out a few years ago, I was at a meeting and somebody jumped up and yelled and screamed that this didn't work as good as what they've been using. And they said, we didn't say it did. Well, then they said, well, why are we going to this? And he said, because it's cheaper. It costs 30% less money to run this versus a mainstreaming program. So we did not switch to the inclusion model because it was a better delivery system. That is not what we did. We switched to the inclusion model because it cost 30% less. And locals were having to pony up too much money to go along with the federal money, and they didn't like that. So we went to this model, which fits the letter of the law, as Jennifer just said. It qualifies. Now, is it as good as what we had? No, but nobody said it was. It's what we could afford. It wasn't the best. It was what we could afford. And so
I was going to
that's part of the problem.
I was going to say that budget was so limited that you couldn't hire teachers that were high up in
Right.
the years of experience. So like you could not hire the people most qualified for the job.
Yeah.
There wasn't enough money and the EC teachers get paid out of that budget. So it's just funny. Like my husband taught EC for a year and they were like, man, would we love to keep you, but you got to go. You're too expensive. So we got to put you back in the class. Like they needed EC teachers. They just couldn't afford, they can't.
Yeah.
Weird, budget.
Remember that crossing those funding streams, they couldn't take local money and put with his federal money and pay him more. Couldn't do that. I advocated for that 25 years ago. Who was listening to me?
We have pull out like what Jennifer's talking about too. We've got 2 teachers that do that pull out. But in elementary, it's very difficult to have just 2 teachers be responsible for inclusion with all of those schedules and pull out too and meet the demands of their IEP.
Yeah,
It's like astronomical trying to figure it out.
yeah, it really is. It's just a, you know, it's a conundrum when it comes to scheduling time. That's why you got to start with it. But as Jennifer pointed out, they want you to pull this miracle off with the cheapest teachers in the building, the least prepared, the least qualified, and the hardest job in the building, which is teaching EC kids. I mean, you know, I guess at lunch we're going to, you know, work on cold fusion at the same time, I guess. I mean, that's about as simple as what you're asking us to do here. I mean, it's just nuts what we're doing. I mean, you know, but again, because we can't cross those funding streams, see, what you'd think you'd do is you take that federal money and put a little some extra money and get, you know, the most qualified teachers, but we can't do that. Which again, I belabor that point, but a lot of these, that's the whole point of this law and finance course is they go together. And you have to understand that. But the quickest way to get, you know, to get fired and be in jail is either A, diddle the help, or B, misspend the money. That's the two things you can't do. And it's not that we're not talking about you stealing it. We're talking about misspending because you didn't know the rules, because the rules are so aggravating and hard to understand. And because of these rules and restrictions, it makes it really hard to meet the needs of the students that we need to meet. And you have to get very creative with your schedule, and you have to have teachers who are willing to be flexible. And that's the part that we don't talk about often enough. Is, you know, everybody wants to blame everything for COVID for everything. I think teachers were a little bit grumbly before COVID. I tend to remember that in the last, I don't know, since the economy crashed in 2008, where it was no longer, you couldn't teach school and make a reasonable living for your family. Teachers have been pretty angry for the last, 15 years. They've been pretty mad since then. And then you ask them to do more and more with less and to be flexible and all these things. The milk of human kindness in most teachers is kind of soured or dried up. And then you're asking them to do all these crazy different schedules to meet all these IEPs. And no, you know, they want to come to work and do their job and go home. And we're asking them to do stuff that just makes no sense. And that makes it harder and harder for us to administer these federal programs. This is the hardest one. This is the hardest program to deal with by far. So let's talk about EC programs and what you have to do to administer an EC program. Here's some big ideas, and I always like to give people credit for the work that they've done. That's why I've not changed that document. A student did that document. This was Dr. Josh Sane. He was a doctoral student here. As I said, Josh usually works with me during the regular semester. He was principal in Lincoln and went to the central office in charge of this, and now he's with a private company, Curriculum Associates, and he's a worldwide expert. He travels all over the United States teaching them MTSS and how that and EC intersect. And so this is his PowerPoint. And so let me make sure I share my screen. And we'll work through it. It's not a lot of slides. I hate to sit and read stuff, but we need to make sure we do. EC law, administrators should know when complying with EC policy. This is, I had him go through and I told him he couldn't do but 20 slides. He did 27. And so we start with free and appropriate education. Must be available to all kids residing in the state 3 to 21. It has to be made available who are incarcerated, turn to be eligible prior to their incarceration. And that includes kids who are not in your school, but are in your attendance boundary. Let me say that again. Free and appropriate education. And the child find says that it doesn't matter where they are, if they're in private schools, if they're in charter schools, if they're incarcerated, If they're wards of the state, it does not matter. If they're in your attendance zone, you got to go find them and educate them. That's what child find means. We talked about that over the weekend. That's a really tough one there as well. But you got to understand that when they go over to the local private school, that doesn't absolve you of the responsibility of dealing with it. And we talked about that story. We talked about that last time we were together. Least restrictive environment. We're always trying to move kids, not more restrictive, but we're trying to move them least restrictive, so that we can eventually get them to where their services don't look like services, or they don't get any, they place out. I mean, one of the things about inclusion that a lot of folks like, even though it might not be as good academically, is it looks more like regular ed because they're in the regular ed classroom. And they like that. And that qualifies as less restrictive. I worry that they don't learn as much. But I guess the social part of it is very important. Seems to me like that we need to be more focused on getting kids help than raising their social media image or profile. But that's just a grumpy old man. All right, continuum of alternative placements. Regular classes, special schools, home instruction, hospital. Now, the question always pops up, where do alternative schools fall in this? That are discipline based. When a kid gets in trouble, gets suspended for 10 days from school, does manifestation termination, determined that whatever he did was not a function of his disability, and he's sent over to the alternative school for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever. The question arises, do we have to provide him exceptional children's services over there? And the answer, of course, is yes, we do. And that there in itself lies another problem. How do we get services over there?
Yeah, I've been in high schools that definitely shared resource teachers and self-contained with the alternative school.
Yeah.
So you talk about staffing before, like inclusion versus mainstreaming. Like inclusion's great, but we just don't have the staffing for it. So mainstreaming, I mean, even doing that, like those teachers that teach resource, their caseloads are maxed. Yeah. So the idea of kind of taking them and having them go into a classroom to help out 1 or 2 kids is great, but it's just not feasible.
Exactly. It just makes no sense. It just makes no sense. When I was in Burke County and I set up the alternatives, I was in central office there. I set up the alternative school, the first one that they ever had in Burke County. And one of the things that I made sure I did was plan for an EC teacher, and everybody was like, well, hey, why would you give them that? That'd be like giving them a reward over there, because I don't want to go to prison. That's why I've hired an EC teacher for the alternative school. I prefer not to make little rocks out of big rocks. I'd not rather be, on the chain gang here. That's why. But you have a lot of people who think that when a kid goes through alternative education, gets due process, that they lose their rights. They do not. They do not. That does not change their exceptional children's status, nor their right to a free and appropriate education. Faith. Now and it is a change in placement. But it's based on, it's not because of their disability that they still get services. So you can't just say, well, we'll send them over there for 6 weeks and hope nobody will notice. That's not how that works. And so we have to understand that alternative ed, there is, generally a kid's got to be put up for a 10-day suspension with a due process hearing. And before the due process hearing can happen, we'll talk about this when we do the discipline modular. before the due process hearing is done, there has to be a manifestation determination, which is a function, the DEC 5 functional behavior assessment. Psychologist has to do a reeval, have to update the IEP, and have to do a behavior intervention plan. They have to check it. And if we determine that the kid's behavior was not a manifestation of their disability, then they can have a due process hearing for a long-term suspension or an alternative placement. But if you do an alternative placement, you got to have a teacher. That begs the question: what if it was such a heinous act that we don't give them an alternative placement, that we do a long-term suspension, we send them home for 30 days? Do we have to send somebody home to teach them? Jennifer said she knows the answer.
Yeah, because I had to do it after school, myself and an EC teacher teaching online homebound after a student threatened to kill another student.
Yep, we certainly do. So whether we send them to the alternative school, the alternate school, that's usually for the kids with, the kids who are, different. There's a difference between alternative school and alternate school. Alternative school is discipline based. Alternate school is like Midwood was in CMS, for kids who just don't fit into the normal schedule. Goss, whatever, it doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter if it's alternate school, alternative school, discipline school, boot camp school, or just send them home for 30 days. The EC folks, that their services follow with them. You have to understand that. Again, once they've been out of their regular placement for 10 days, you've got to do a manifestation determination anyway to determine if they're in the most, what's going on. And again, you can't not count in school suspension. You can't just give them 1 day every time, regardless of what the handbook says. You got to give them just like everybody else. But the difference is, and I pointed this out before, the third time a kid does the same thing, he should go to the front of the line and get his manifestation determination because he's showing a pattern. So we have to do that. But people want to avoid that like the plague because they don't get services over to alternative school or home. Cost extra. Homebound services are sending somebody over there. So we have schools doing everything in the world to try to avoid putting these kids, getting them the services that they need or doing a manifestation determination because they don't want to have to share their EC teacher, go over to that building. They're already strapped, or they don't want them to have to send them to somebody's house or have them online teaching them. But again, we have to follow the rules. Placement decisions are made by the IA team, reforms to least restrictive environment. Child's placement is reviewed annually. When I have you observe an IEP meeting, this is the part that I want you to walk away. Your takeaway on it is that the IEP is done collaboratively. That's one of the things that EC teachers, most of them know that. I'm going to stop my share for a second. We're going to talk about that one. But I have seen I've seen EC teachers and regular ed, mostly regular ed teachers that dig their heels in that we're going to do this. The parent says, no, I don't want that. And usually it's because the EC teachers did, spend all the time doing the paperwork, but they're invested in that or married to that. And the regular ed teachers, they want them out of their room or want them somewhere else. But the point to remember here on those IEPs is, and the placement decisions, the least restrictive environment, is it has to be collaborative with the parent. So my question is, what if a parent just won't go along with what you're going to do? What do you do now, Hero? Parent says, I don't like this. I don't like either the placement decision or the IEP. What options do you have now if the parent refuses to sign off on the paper? Jessica, I'll start with you. I know you do LEA rep.
I actually just sat through an IEP that this came up. the parent ultimately, I mean, we're responsible for coming up with a solution. We're responsible for coming up with a team solution that the parent is okay with or acceptable of. We can't just stop. The
Yeah.
services still have to be provided.
Unless the parent does what? Now, if the parent, what can the parent do? And I've seen too many people try to get parents to do this, trick them into doing this. What can a parent do? They can sign a waiver and decline services.
Mm-hmm. And they can choose to pull them out too.
Yeah, that's what I
And
mean. That's it. And I've seen a lot of schools that when the parents didn't agree, they would trick them into trying to do that. What happens if you get caught tricking a parent into trying to do that?
you get sued.
Oh boy, lose your house.
Mhm.
And so you have to find a solution. You have to find a solution, and they don't have to go along with it. And tricking them in or encouraging them to withdraw their kid can't be part of that solution, by the way.
It just has to be data based and
Yep.
founded in data, as long as our
Now,
data can prove the decision we've made.
right. I'm gonna ask Jennifer this question. Jennifer, can you sue the parent?
No, I don't think so. Not unless,
You can, but it's the dumbest thing you could ever do.
yeah, I was gonna say, not in any of these cases. Like, I can think of other cases in which the school could, yes, bring charges against,
No,
but
you can
not,
sue the parent. You can sue you can sue the parent of an EC kid for not participating in their IEP. You absolutely can take
Oh.
them to a court hearing for doing that. That would be about the dumbest thing that you ever did in your life. But legally, you could do it.
Oh yeah, see, yeah. I guess I was just thinking, I was trying to think of something that would actually do, that someone would actually do.
Yeah,
Not
no,
not
you would
like
never.
a giant red flag, like, hey, please come and examine all of our schools' data. Not just this, but all of it to see how we're doing.
Yeah, but I've heard people say, when parents refuse, well, we'll just sue them. No, you won't. That's not an option. Legally, yes, it is legally, but jumping off this roof of this building here, I'm sitting in my office tonight. That's an option too. It's just not a smart one. It's be about as self-destructive. So Jessica has the answer. Is you just got to find a way. It's got to be data-based. Don't even think about that option of we'll just sue the parents and make them do what we told them. No, well, you can, but you shouldn't. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. You just got to remember that part. That is not an option. We'll just say it that way. Yes, if you held my feet to the fire, it is legal. You can do it, but it should never be an option. Should never be on the table. Now, you're going to have more parents than I would like to admit that are going to fight you over what either your LRE, least restrictive environment placement, the IEP, the behavior intervention plan. Oh, they hate that. Especially in the era since the last presidential election, when everybody now is worried about freedom. That's all I hear now is freedom. I should be able to do whatever I want, whenever I want. Oh, what a bunch of nitwits that don't understand how society and schools work, where, the rights of the group supersede the rights of the individual. We have so many parents now who object to any kind of behavior intervention plan. And there's all these internet experts who talk about, well, they're just boys being boys. They want them to all, that we're emasculating all the male children and asking them to, be able to behave indoors. No, we're not. But that's the kind of stuff that you hear all the time now. All these nitwits on the internet. That this notion that we're trying to make kids behave against that's a wrong or a bad thing. So we're getting a lot more parents who don't want to do anything. to correct the behavior of their children. So BEPs are a sticking point now, behavior intervention plans. They're a big sticking point right now, and a lot more parents are challenging the school on their placement, and a lot of them on the actual content of the goals in the IEP as well. But while technically legal to sue a parent, you should never. That should not be on the table. All right. Anybody else have any, Corey, Siobhan, Jesse, have any notions of ways that you can get parents to go along with what you have written, or the placement decision that you've made to get them to be a part of that when they're opposed to it? Anybody else have any secret notions other than you just got to find a way? All right. Thank you.
The only thing I'll say is you got to make them feel like they're a part of the process.
Yeah.
As much as possible. So, even sometimes simple decisions about, that don't ultimately kind of matter, but if they're in like this teacher's class versus that teacher's or whatever, even though it like kind of doesn't matter because it's like the same class, the same block.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes those little things that make them feel like they're making those decisions
Exactly.
or being involved can kind of push some of that through.
Yeah. One of the things that I would recommend is Zoom in with parents if you can during the process, to kind of keep them apprised of what's going on and not just spring it on them at the IEP meeting. You can do that. I mean, we're not asking them to come over every week, but you can Zoom with parents and you can say, this is what we're thinking, and get their input. I think Corey, you're exactly right. But for some reason, schools think that the only time that we let the cat out of the bag is at the IEP meeting. And that's the first time parents have seen some of this stuff. And sometimes they're taking a look. If you did a little of that prep work along the way where they had a voice in it and felt like that they were, being facilitated, that you might have less problems at the actual meetings. All right, let's talk about the IEP team itself. I'm trying to keep my eye on time here. This time gets away on this one. Biggest mistake that we make is a regular ed teacher is not available. We'll just grab another regular ed teacher walking down the hall. That is a FERPA violation. Can't do that. If everybody can't be there, then you need to reschedule the meeting. It's not against the law. It's not a problem. You should reschedule meetings. Do not just grab people off the hallway. If they don't have standing in the case, it's a violation of federal FERPA law. For those of you who don't know, and I know you all know this stuff, I'm just pretty much reviewing it. I've got this one right here. Let's see. Right here, I've got the link to this one right here, and it's quite. There's a lot of parts, and there's other places that you can go to here, other embedded links. But basically, the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act say that we can't be divulging information about people's children to other people, even other parents. Even if, say, you've got two kids who are involved in an incident, you can't even talk to one parent about the other kid. And so that's why this one is first. This is the one that people do the dumbest stuff on, bring the wrong people in, talk about it in the lounge, talk about it in the hallway. Josh, if he were here, he'd tell you he's still being sued over two teachers talking about a kid in the hallway. He was principal years ago. We don't talk about them. We don't bring people in the room that don't have standing. That's the big one. We really have to make sure, because FERPA, people will sue you in a heartbeat. Children in private schools, make sure you understand child find. You got to go find them. You got to go get them. You need to know what private schools are in your district. Now, question arises there. Let's pause here for 1 second. Let's say you've got a private school in your district, and the kid over there in that school does not live in your district, but he goes to the private school in your district. Are you under child find? Are you responsible to see that his IEP is being met? No. Who would be? Jessica, you're muted.
Sorry, the county that the kid lives in, wherever the address is.
Yep, it goes to the address, not the school. Address, not the school. Now, see that's the deal. So if he was over here at Thomas Jefferson in Rutherford County, but he lived in Cleveland County, Chase Middle School is not responsible to educate him, or Ellenborough Elementary on that end of the county. That would be Bowling Springs Elementary or Crest Middle on this side of the county line. That's the way that works. So it goes by the student's home address, not where the school is, but where the kid lives. That makes it much harder.
Does this include charter schools?
I beg your pardon?
Does this include charter schools as well?
Yes. Now, one of the things that most charter schools will try not to take exceptional children, just like most private schools will try not to take exceptional children. And so this is not a real huge problem in terms of thousands of kids, because most charter schools figure out a way to manipulate their philosophy so that it doesn't fit exceptional children, and private schools just won't take them. They don't even have to have an excuse. You ain't taking you. Or if you come, we don't provide you any services, and we don't tell anybody that you're here so that you get any services. Because we don't do that. We don't care if they send somebody over here. We don't do that. And so you're not going to have a lot of EC kids that you got to go hunt down, because the other schools don't want them. And the parents are trying to maybe escape the EC label, and they won't come hunting you either. But you're legally responsible for the kids that live in your attendance district to do this with, to the child find. But don't be surprised if nobody helps you. If the EC people, the private school or charter school, where you will usually is the parent says, my child's over here at this school and I want services. Okay, we'll go do that. Now, are you supposed to go and hunt for them? Yeah, you're supposed to, but that's just one of those things that you gotta know. Hopefully you've got a good enough relationship with the privates and charters in your area that can kind of put you on the leads, of kids, and that will help you. But most of them don't want you over there and don't want to recognize. And they tell parents things like, your child, we don't recognize exceptional children status here. So if your kid comes to school here, they're not exceptional children. That's most of them do, because we don't provide those services. You can choose to go elsewhere. You don't have to come here.
Isn't that kind of like the parent choosing to not receive services for their child?
Yes, it's exactly what it is. And that's why
So why is it my responsibility to go run them down?
That's why I said the law says you're supposed to. What I'm telling you is unless they come knocking on your door, you shouldn't be out hunting these people.
Okay.
But if they find you, you got to provide the services, is what I'm telling you.
Right.
Don't confuse, I don't have to go hunt them with, I don't have to provide them services.
Right.
That's the distinction that I'm trying, poorly I now understand, I'm trying to make here. Legally, you're supposed to go hunt them down. We don't.
Okay.
But that means if somebody shows up, and asks, then we got to do it.
Okay.
But we have a lot of young administrators, because we don't go hunt them down, don't know this. And when somebody shows up, oh, you don't go to school here, we don't have to give you services. Yes, we do. If they come and ask us, yes, we do. But no, we're not. We don't get out and hunt these people down. I know it says child find, but we don't do that. But unfortunately, if they're at the charter or private and their parents come over and say, I want services, you have to provide them services. That's the important part of that. Makes it difficult, I can tell you that. Children in private schools, yep, they can request an evaluation. LEAs must treat child fine pursuit as they would in public school. So I was just telling you here. Now you don't have to go hunt them down. If their parents are there, yes, you have to provide charter schools, you have to provide private schools. Yes, we do. Have to have a servant. No parentally placed private school child has an unlimited right to receive some specific public school. Be informed of this procedure protocol. Public school. There must be revised. Yep, they got an IAP. They've got an IAP. Parental consent. What we're talking about, make every effort to get parental consent. You got to find a way, document all attempts. LEA is responsible for making FAPE available to children with disabilities. If parents refuse services, parents will not be, but make sure you get it documented that they're refusing services. They just can't not show up at the meeting. Referrals, all right. Referrals come in and then we start the 90-day process. Now, this gets a little tricky. What we're encouraging all teachers to do now, instead of making that referral to the EC folks that starts the 30 days, interventions 1 and 2, we want them to do what now? We want them to make that referral to the school-based committee, call the intervention team, care team, whatever you want to call it. We want that to come to them first. And then when they're done with it and they're not successful, then they refer it to the EC for another 90 days. That's what we want now. We do not want our teachers going straight to the EC folks. We want to give ourselves a 90-day chance for intervention with the regular ed teachers, trying those scripted lessons, what we used to refer to as RTI, but now are part of MTSS, those re-scripted lessons. Again, make sure you know how it works in your district. Now, the state rule is refer them to the school intervention team first, but there might be cases that are so severe that you might need to skip the intervention team. But that's kind of a local decision. You need to know. But according to the state, all referrals, initial referrals, go to the intervention team, and not to the EC team. But regardless, it's supposed to be 90 and then 90, and then a testing decision is made, not a placement decision, a testing decision is made after 180 days. And so that's the rule on that one. Initial evaluations. Make sure you meet your deadlines. Within 90 days of the receipt of the written referral. This is after MTSS. Please remember, this is after MTSS. Provide parents notice. Use a variety of assessment tools. Don't use any one single measure. Use sound instruments that assess relative contribution of cognitive and behavioral factors. Always have multiple sources of data. Required screenings for evaluation and eligibility determination. All these right here. These are all the different ones that kids can be placed into for these 14 different areas. Reevals are done, what is it, every 3 years? Make sure that you do those. They can't occur more than once a year. They can be as far out as every 3 years. Some districts are now trying to do them on a 2-year cycle, so if they're running late, they don't miss that. What happens if you don't reeval a kid? Does he stay on your head count? No. If their IEP expires, we don't do the reevaluation, they come off your head count, and then you don't get paid for them. All right, MTSS, RTI, and specific learning disabilities, determining SLD. Again, this is the 90 before the 90. Now, part of the problem that you get into with this one is this is just for kids with a specific learning disability. That's why I said if kids have more severe needs, they go straight to the EC. This is just for kids who are struggling academically or maybe somewhat behave. This is not for the ones that are cutting the heads off chickens and stabbing people. It's not for that bunch. You got to understand that. Specific learning disabilities, SLD, the mildest of all of these. And so, again, you need a decision-making body at your school that says, this is so severe, this should go to the EC people, or this is just an SLD and let's work it out through MTSS and not just throw everybody directly over to the EC people. You got to be monitoring that. That's why I said it's your responsibility. This is 90% of why you have to monitor the intervention team. Because teachers don't want to do this, what will they say? Oh, it's terrible, worst I've ever seen. And what will they all try to do? Throw them all over to the EC hopper and skip the MTSS. That's why you got to monitor this. Because, this is for the milder cases, and teachers don't want any cases, and so you have to monitor this. Determine the of the specific disability. Use your MTSS. If it's not working, you go to EC 90 days, and then then the testing occurs after that. Development of the kid place, you develop your IEP. The regular ed teacher, what the IEP team must consider. The regular ed teacher has to be a part of it. That's one of the things that unfortunately that we miss. That's why it's on there and underlined. Too many times the EC people develop the IEP without the regular ed teacher, and they're surprised at the meeting, or they're not happy because they weren't a part of it. That's why that's underlined. Make sure that that you understand that in the development, when a kid places and you're developing his IEP, his regular ed teacher has a seat at that table. Parents have to have a seat all along the way and make sure that their rights are safeguarded. To that end, I have that link in here as well. Under tonight, it's right here. Parental resources, and this is what it looks like, and it has links and places. It has all these links that they can go to. Make sure the parents are involved from day one, minute one, right along with the regular ed teacher. And generally, and I don't mean to throw EC folks under the bus, but too many times what we find is at the first IEP meeting, the first time the parents or the regular ed teacher has seen the contents of the IEP is at that meeting. They were not involved in the development of it. That does not go well. And parents have rights in that, and they're right here. If you click on that, you can see that's the link to the notice of the safeguards right there. And here they are. Independent evaluations, prior written notice, parental consent, access to record, due process hearings to resolve complaints, availability of mediation, child placement during due process, procedures for students who are subject to alternative education placement, they have rights, and I already talked to you about those. Civil actions, attorney's fees, those things. Discipline procedures, again, you have to determine if the kid's behavior is a manifestation of his disability before you can remove him to an alternative school, or when he hits 10 days of a change in placement, which is bus suspension, out of school suspension, in school. I don't care if you call it the ICU room. I don't care what you call it. If his butt's not in his regular seat, that's a change of placement. And that counts toward that 10 days. I don't care how you do that. You got to make sure that you have followed that. Again, you got to do a manifestation of termination. When you're up for discipline that kid, if you're moving for a long-term suspension or an alternative placement, or if he's got a pattern of behavior and he's getting suspended regularly, pattern is 3. Definition of change of placement: out of school suspension, in school bus suspension, change in schedule or classroom, accelerated manifestation due to a pattern 3 times. This is my slide that I put in there. You can tell Josh is a lot more, his stuff's a lot better than my stuff, but I'm just kind of to the point, black and white. This is it right here. This is the definition of change in placement. I have had people argue every one of these, but when I can tell you, when you go to court, and I used to have to go to court all the time for Charlotte Meck for this, these are the things that you will learn in court. All of these count as a change in placement. Manifestation of termination, functional behavior assessment, got to be done. And then here's kind of the minimum expectations for complying with EC policy. Always refer to the policies governing services for EC kids with disability. Knows your district specific interpretation of policy. When you're unsure, ask questions, be proactive, prepared. If there are concerns in the IAP meeting, unsure to proceed, stop the meeting. This is if you're the LEA rep, which you will be as a new AP. Make every effort, attempt to keep parents involved. Each child's disability is unique. Don't expect a playbook of how to support the student. So Josh has done a really good job highlighting the most important stuff and the landmines here. This is a really good one. All right, and I've shown you all of these. Your FERPA page, your parent right page. Move this out of the way. Your intervention process, and I've got Dale's top 10, but what you'll see is I've got that as number 7. No, number 8, excuse me. Number 8, most important thing that in terms of that will get you, that you're not even aware of is FERPA violations around your building. So you've got to be aware that those are happening. That's number 8 on my, although it's probably more relevant and more important than that. It's number 8 because you really can't, there's nothing you can do other than tell people not to do it. You and the EC folks know not to do it. You know not to do it. You know not to grab a regular ed teacher that has nothing to do with it, but you can't stop the crosstalk in teachers' lounges and lunchrooms out in public or in hallways. Last thing I have for you tonight is under you see this one says Dr. Caton and Miraculous folder. Again, they're sitting principals. They let me link to their folder, and here are documents that you would use. If you were AP or a principal, or if you were LEA rep, here are some of the documents that you would use. These are real. These are live, by the way. And so here's a link to them. Okay. That is a quick overview of exceptional children, intervention into exceptional children. Remember, intervention is yours. You got to make sure it's happening like it's supposed to be. If it's the 90 before the 90, that it's happening. You understand that part is on you. Most places have good EC people, but as Jennifer pointed out, they're stretched beyond the limit and you can't put money with them. There's a lot of issues. And so again, in 603, our main focus of our OMA is building master schedules. Again, I can't tell you enough time, all your federal programs come first, and at the front of the line of your federal programs is your EC program. It drives how you schedule, or should drive how you schedule your entire school, if you're smart. And I know you all are, because y'all are the EDCI bugs. Y'all are always smarter than those operations people on the other side. Questions you have for me? Look at there. We got done right on time, didn't we? It's just like a miracle. It's like I do this for a living. I'm amazed. I'm just as surprised as you are. It only took an hour. I see y'all again next week. Can't wait. I'll see you then. Everybody have a good night. Thank you for joining me.